Okay, hello all, and here we are. Today, what I kind of am titling this is Isaac Massa in Context, Mapping the Northern World. And so we're going to trace the history we've been talking about and look at some of the developments in mapping. I want to start out with this map. So this map is the Waldseemüller World Map, the Carta Marina, and it was made in 1516. This is the map that is now on display at the Library of Congress. The United States government paid $10 million to own this map. The first map that shows the first surviving map with America on it as a continent. And usually when people look at this map, they're looking at this part of the world. But I want to turn our attention up to this part of the world, Eurasia, and the area that we've been talking about. Here is a more close-up version of what in 1516, a German map maker thought he understood about the place that we now call Russia. And I'll just point out a couple of things. We have Tataria in here. We have Cumans. We've read a little bit about those. We have this as the Black Sea. Here we've got Anatolia, probably an Ottoman Turkish down there. And this is, well, I think this is the Caspian Sea. Even though it doesn't conform all that closely to the geography we see right now, but we can kind of make out Black Sea, Caspian Sea, Caucasus Mountains. There's a Crimean Peninsula that we would kind of recognize, right? And there should be no surprise. The Crimean Peninsula is one of the places that the ancient world, ancient Greeks had trading colonies in that place. Maybe Jason of the Argonauts was off the coast of there. Greek mythology mentions this geography of the world. So it's one of the places that has been known about for a very long time. But then we've got other rulers out here, some sort of Tatar ruler. We think this maybe the Russian ruler. This is another ruler down here near the Volga. And then we have kind of spirits blowing winds and north, and we've got some trees and some mountains, and that's what we see. That's what we know. There's not much more really concrete geographical information at that point. And so just to revisit, we've read about Sigismund von Herberstein. He goes in 1517, 1526. So he takes his first trip to Russia 2 years after this map is drawn and published. And Herberstein in 1549 puts out this map of Russia. So we see a little bit more detail, but still much that's left to be desired. And then, as we know, the English in the middle of the 16th century get to Russia in Richard Chancellor's journey. And keep in mind, the greater context was what? From the 15th century, from the 1440s, and the Portuguese court of Henry the Navigator, European entities led by Portugal had been investing in maritime exploration. In the 1440s, Henry of the Navigators from his court leaves a ship that is able to navigate past the court of Bahadir on the west coast of Africa, which had been a real navigational challenge. And then they keep going south to Cape Horn, and then they go around, and Vasco da Gama gets to the Indian Ocean in the 1490s, but as we know, he has been scooped by Christopher Columbus, also interested in going to the Indies, as part of this massive maritime exploration project. A very accomplished sailor who's, but for whom the math of his geographic calculations of the size of the globe was subpar to the current knowledge of the day. And so when he appealed to the court of Portugal to fund his journeys, they said, maybe you've got a good sailing reputation, but we think your numbers about the size of the ocean and the size of the globe are off. Let's not fund this grant application. But in Ferdinand and Isabella, a little bit late to the party to get in on the maritime exploration game, they fund him. And we know where that goes. He lands in Hispaniola, makes huge claims for Spain, and the Spanish Empire in the 16th century is really a global power. And if you'll recall, when Sigismund von Herberstein is traveling to Moscow, in their party was a diplomat returning from the court of Emperor Charles back to Muscovy with him. So as all of this maritime exploration, you've heard probably since elementary school about the journeys of Christopher Columbus. You've probably heard as well about the journeys of Vasco da Gama in getting to the Indies. Along with this, there is a huge effort and project to explore northern oceans. And so there are a number of these projects that also are taking place. Richard Chancellor's journey, part of the merchant adventurers of Muscovy, these men that pooled their money together with the intent of getting to the Far East, the Indies, Cathay is what they call it. I have up there, Dreams of Cathay. That was their intention. Things didn't go quite as planned. Of 3 ships, 2 of them went down, and one of them stops off in Norway along the way on the shores, and he gets to the mouth of the Dvina River, Richard Chancellor, where he comes down on sled, meets Muscovy, and Ivan IV, who is open and keen to trade, understands that that's a revenue generating thing, and if the state can tax it, that's really good for a state's fortunes. But he doesn't have a foothold on the Baltic, and he's got some belligerent relations to the West. And so he's not able to conduct the direct trade, somewhat hindered in maybe his trade aspirations. So having Englishmen come in on a ship through the north is a great opportunity. He said, yes, let's do it. Let's set up trade relations. I don't need to go through, I don't need to do the bidding of those Lithuanians and Livonians after all, or those Swedes. I can trade directly with England. Great, let's do it. So, and thus begins the history of the Muscovy Company. Now, as you know, there is a lot of, there's continued significant energy to explore this part of the world and maybe get over to the East. One of the most famous figures in that endeavor, and thus the Barents Sea is named after him, is Wilhelm Barents. And Wilhelm Barents is a Dutchman and an explorer who goes on 3 journeys and does not return from the last one in the 1590s, 1594, 1595, 1596. And they're trying to explore these oceans and get through them. It isn't easy because the window in which you can sail is narrow. The Kara Sea sometimes ships entirely. And for example, this in this map right here, you see this island of Novaya Zemlya. It was a real question for a long time if that was an island or if the land was actually attached. And it wasn't so easy to determine because of ice. It wasn't so easy to determine because of ice. And thus, before I moved to Isaac Massa, so that's sort of some exploratory efforts that are made in the 1590s that result in the Barents Sea being named after Wilhelm Barents. there's earlier efforts. In the 1580s, there's some attempted Venetian merchants, actually, Venetians and Dutch, who are trying to cooperate and fund exploration. If you'll remember, Hudson Bay and Henry Hudson is similarly in the northern parts of America. After John Cabot, and John Cabot goes, and then Henry Hudson goes. He discovers the Hudson River, travels far upriver, comes up on another journey, goes, discovers the Hudson Bay. His crew mutinies on him, and they leave him there. So he dies somewhere we are not clear, in probably 1610, over there, around there in the territory of the bay that has his namesake. And so 1610, that is right smack dab in the lifetime of Isaac Massa. In fact, he leaves Russia after his first extended stay there in 1609. So that's just some of the simultaneous things that are going on. Another simultaneous thing that is going on, and this is going to be just a little bit of a tease, but I want to mention that the Stroganov family also is interested in doing some Northeast Passage exploration that doesn't materialize. They have an agent, Olivier Brunel, a Dutchman, whom, according to the faint and really unclear records that we have, they're interested in funding an exploratory ship. They commission him to kind of be their agent, work for them, to go to back to the Netherlands and put together a crew and, you know, be their man on the ground. And what happens is they never hear from him again. And whether he sort of took the money and run and did them wrong, or there's some other story, is unclear to me. It's a history I'd like to know sometime. But I think it's very much worth keeping in mind that as we think about these exploration efforts in the second half of the 16th century, that a lot of energy is directed northward. And this major Russian merchant family it was also had some interest in similarly participating in exploration efforts. And so that and we'll have a lecture on the conquest of Siberia and the Stroganovs' roles in it. Did they initiate it or not, is a question we might ask. We'll learn about the charters that the Russian government issued to them in 1558, 1568, and then subsequent ones as well. And we'll hear about the conquest of Siberia led by Yermak, whom you can pretty much think of as sort of the Blackwater private contractor for the Stroganovs. We'll talk more about that later. So it's in that world that we are starting to learn about Isaac Massa, or he was, you know, just a little boy when, or sorry, he wasn't even born yet when Yermak first toppled Kachum in Siberia in 1581 or 1582. And he was not yet born when Tsar Ivan IV died in 1584. But he kind of lives in the shadow of some of that history. His dates are about 1586 to 1643. He goes first to Moscow as a merchant apprentice. He is a young boy, and his big commercial family sends him to Russia, where he works as an apprentice for 9 years. So he really grows up. Think about it on your own, just growing up in Russia in 1609, living through this period of effectively state collapse. And he'll write a history about it. He'll return to the Netherlands, and he will develop a career as merchant diplomat. You hear that phrase a lot, and even sometimes for me, I think, well, is he more merchant or more diplomat? And yes, maybe there's more refined answers to these questions, but as a general rule, commerce and diplomacy, especially in this century, are fellow travelers. Anthony Jenkinson, is he merchant or diplomat? He is both. Richard Chancellor, is he, private entrepreneur or diplomat? He ends up being both. There is no real separation between kind of private, public, governmental sphere in the way that our modern minds might seek for those sorts of divisions. So, I mean, although as embassies become established and become more formal things, there's definitely those distinctions. They will emerge. They began to emerge in Renaissance Italy of the 15th century, where between city-states started to really appoint their formal attaches, and then the world of diplomacy grows, whereas countries developed relations, they send envoys back and forth. That's what Sigismund von Herberstein and Olearius were. And then as relations develop, they'll have a permanent embassy, and thus evolves the diplomatic picture of the world. But in large part in the 16th century, and as pertains to Western European countries' relations to Europe, to Russia, what we have is more an ad hoc diplomatic setting where merchants that have been there, know something about the country, know the language, get tapped by government forces who want to make trade deals, trade treaties, alliances, military things, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the world and the way in which Isaac Massa ends up also in part in the service of the States General. So in his lifetime, he takes multiple trips to Russia, and see in the reading, there's a lot we don't know about his biography as you'll read, and his biography isn't entirely clear. So see what kind of things you can nail down, and maybe I can even get more specific with this slide at one point. He's also just kind of a little bit of history. He is a Dutchman living in this period of the 80 Years' War, a period in which these 7 Dutch states are rebelling against the Spanish Empire. And I kind of just wanted to show you this picture because this is a picture of the Amsterdam Town Hall, which opened in 1655. And it has a marble floor that was inlaid with a map from Johann Blau. And so it just kind of speaks. This is a mid-17th century architectural monument to Amsterdam governance, and it speaks to the importance and kind of the pride in cartographic discovery and knowledge of the world at that time. Another moment about the kind of the context in which Isaac Massa lives, it is the emergence of the age of trading companies, and the Dutch VOC, which to this day, amortized over time, is the largest trading company ever, or the largest company ever. And yeah, actually I don't have the picture here comparing kind of the valuation of that company compared to Apple and Exxon and all the big companies that you know of in our modern day. So the Dutch East India Company is getting very wealthy, leading to what we call the golden age for the Dutch Empire. And we have, in addition to tremendous commercial profits being made, still life and art is just thrives in the Netherlands. And there are many famous artists doing artwork there of the kind of latter end of, well, I kind of think of it not so much as Renaissance art anymore, but there is that Northern Renaissance emergence that gives way. Dutch, I have here a picture of the ship, Dutch maritime ship. Some people think it's the Dutch flag that is the model for what becomes and is today the Russian flag. And also participation in map making. Amsterdam is the world center of printing during this age. There are printing presses. There are printing presses that are in multiple languages, from even including Russian and Arabic during the 17th century, and the workshops of probably the most famous map makers of the Blaus in the 17th century, it is said, may have at some points worked almost 24 hours around the clock, churning out maps of the newly discovered and newly better understood and able to be drawn maps of the new world. Here is just a portrait I'll show you, mid 17th century, so a bit later, by the very famous by the very famous author Vermeer. And there in the background, you see what a map. I mean, this is kind of the age of Dutch commercial efflorescence and an age of maps. And this right here is one portrait. Speaking of Dutch paintings, here is a painting that we know survives. And this is Isaac Massa and his wife, Beatrix van der Laan. And this portrait was painted of him in 1622. And now, actually, here, and let me, sorry about that. And let me show you this one last picture. This map right here is the map that we understand to have been drawn by Isaac Massa of around the year 1610, or so, kind of right when he returned from his first 9-year stay in Russia. He drew this map of the northern coastline and what he had learned about it. And this map became tremendously important. It became the map that found its way into all these major atlases that I was telling you about. And here is Mercator, who gives us the Mercator projection. This is his map in 1595, which doesn't seem to be largely informed by Massa's map. This is Mercator's map of Asia. So we have kind of another look at what we think he knows about the northern coast. This is Mercator's map of Russia, also from his 1595 atlas. And again, it does not approach the detail of this map, in which he seems here, he makes a note. He understands Novaya Zemlya to be not connected, but rather an island that sometimes ice freezes over and makes it, which made it a hard question to answer for a while. I will stop there, and we will look at, when we talk about Siberia and the exploration there, in more detail at maps of Siberia and how cartographic traditions and understanding of northern Asia developed in the 17th century.